wife worked for a busy hospital and recently received a long overdue promotion in 2022. However, there was a catch. The catch was that in order to receive this promotion, she had to transfer to another hospital. Luckily for her, she had grown kind of tired of where we were currently living. And in the back of her mind, she had been hoping for a change anyway. And so, she agreed to relocate in order to secure the significant pay raise and benefits package. Our son Kevin just turned 16, and my wife Lauren stayed home long enough to help us pack the house before she left ahead of us to start her new position. She caught a flight to our new home in Grand Prairie, Alberta, to begin work as soon as possible. The whole process of packing up everything our son had ever known was stressful, depressing, and caused a few arguments with Kevin. He was about to lose all of his friends, so it was expected and understandable that he would be a little bit more than unhappy about all of this. But regardless of his feelings, we stuck to the plan. We were to finish up with the movers and then drive to our new home a few days after Lauren had left. We got the last few boxes of ours loaded up a little later than expected, and we were tired. This move had been a massive undertaking so far, but with the bedding packed up and nowhere to sleep, we decided to go ahead and hit the road. We could always stop at a hotel along the way if we needed to. It was already 8:30 in the evening, with the sun barely visible in the sky, and our drive had just begun. Both Kevin and I were already exhausted, but we both missed Lauren, and we just wanted this whole thing to be over and done with. A few hours later, and after a quick stop to grab some dinner, we were nicely settled into the long late-night drive on Highway 43, heading towards Grand Prairie. It was dark, like pitch black outside, as our car cut through the night. The highway turned into a 2-lane road for a long stretch surrounded by thick woods on each side. We had to be careful of the wildlife that lived in those thick woods. Moose in this area were gigantic and almost impossible to see in the dark, especially on a night as dark as this one. I found it strange how there seemed to be very little traffic on the highway. I had only seen one car in the past hour. The road started to get some twists and turns in it. So, with no one around and Kevin passed out in the seat next to me, I began to maneuver the car around the turns using both lanes so that I didn't have to take the car off of cruise control, which allowed me to maintain my speed around the curves. In all honesty, I was sleepy myself, but the GPS said we were under a couple hours away from our destination, so I would speed every chance I got, making sure to keep my eyes keen on the road in case something jumped in front of us. There was this one curve that I rounded. The sign told me to slow down to 70 kilometers an hour, but I ignored it and just continued on using both lanes like I had been in order to make the curve at highway speed. And it was at that moment when it happened. Suddenly, the darkness of the night was pierced by flashing red and blue lights coming up behind me. They bounced off of the towering trees on either side of the road as the patrol car sped up behind me. He didn't have sirens on. There was no need for that. The contrast of the pitch-black night against his flashing red and blues was more than sufficient to get any motorist's attention. Beside me, Kevin was waking up because of the lights and sudden change in speed as I put on my signal light and began to pull over to the side of the road. Lauren was going to be so mad at me for this. She hated it when I drove too fast. Working in a hospital, she had seen more than her fair share of injuries as a result of speeding. I tried to look in my mirror to see the officer behind me, but the flashing lights were blinding. I tilted my rear view mirror up to reflect the lights in a different direction, to stop them from flashing repeatedly in my eyes. Then once I relieved myself of that annoyance, I fumbled around my glove box to retrieve my insurance and registration. I sat there for what seemed like an unusual amount of time waiting for the officer. But the officer did not step out of the vehicle. His car just sat there behind mine, on the side of this pitch-black highway, lights flashing and headlights pouring into my cab. I was confused as to what was taking so long. A good solid 2 minutes went by, and after Kevin asking me what's wrong several times, I leaned out of my window and faced the police car shielding my eyes from the bright lights. "Hello? Officer, is there something I can help you with?" I called out to the car behind us, without really seeing the officer himself. There was no response. The door to the squad car never moved, but my heart did when I heard a voice just to the front of my car. "Sir, can I ask you to please remain in your vehicle for both my safety and yours?" I pulled myself back into my driver's seat, sitting rigid and completely confused. I was all eyes, and I swear to the heavens above that not a single person ever got out of that police car. Not one. "Sir, can you please explain to me why you are speeding down this pitch-black highway when you can't see past the distance of your own headlights?" the officer asked as he peeked into the windows of my car with his flashlight. Kevin squinted and looked away from the light while I sat there dumbfounded. I just could not wrap my head around how this officer appeared in front of my car. "I'm really sorry, officer. I must have missed the speed limit and I'm just a little tired and trying to get my son home," I answered in the most respectful tone I could muster. The officer lowered his flashlight, which finally allowed me to get a look at his face. And what I seen was completely unexpected. His face was covered in horrific scars on the right side. It looked like he had been in a fire at some point. After the initial shock of seeing his healed injuries, my observations moved on to notice that he was a pretty large man, and no doubt, very strong. My eyes then came to rest on his name tag. "Officer Davies," it read. "You just sit right there for a moment," Officer Davies said as he took my license and registration and began walking to his squad car. I looked over at Kevin, who was shaking his head at me. "Mom is going to be so mad at you." I just shook my head, but was again legitimately freaked out by what I saw next. He was in his car, inside it, but once again, I never saw the door open. He wasn't doing anything, just sitting behind the wheel, motionless, staring straight ahead. I couldn't see his features, only his silhouette through the headlights, but I could see him just motionless, like a statue. What the hell is he doing? Just sitting there? After several minutes, and even my son picking up the feeling that something was off, Officer Davies opens the door, and this time I actually seen him step out of the cruiser. He walks over to my window again and leans down, producing a ticket and my documents. "Listen, Jesse," he says to me, using my first name after reading it off my license. "These roads at night can kill you. Anything could happen, and that's why I pulled you over tonight. Slow it down, follow the speed limits. I don't want to be scraping you off the concrete because you were in too much of a hurry." With that, he stood up straight and mechanically turned and walked straight back to his cruiser, where I watched him open the door and get in. What a strange thing to say in front of a kid, I thought to myself. I sat there for a minute, wondering if I was free to go before deciding to chance it. Easing on the gas, slowly pulling away from the side of the road, getting back onto the highway, and driving off into the darkness. After around a half a kilometer, the flashing lights behind me vanished abruptly. That wasn't odd, but what was odd was that the headlights had also vanished at the same time. I dismissed it and blamed the weird events on the dark, stress of the move, and lack of sleep. But deep down, I knew what I saw. And so did Kevin. We made it to Grand Prairie and collapsed on our beds with no sheets to sleep while we could. The next evening, I decided to take Kevin and drive to the address on the ticket Officer Davies issued me for speeding. I wanted to pay it, and have it over before Lauren found out. After an hour-and-a-half drive, I arrived in the very small town where Officer Davies was stationed out of and made my way to the courthouse. Kevin and I went inside and approached the service desk, where a middle-aged woman wrapped in a sweater sat waiting to help. "Yes, sir, how can I help you?" she asked as I approached her, smiling with Kevin just behind me. She smiled at Kevin as I produced the ticket from my pocket and handed it to her. "Yes, ma'am. I was a little careless while coming through on the highway last night and was doing a little speeding. But one of your guys got me and I'd like to just go ahead and pay the fine now," I said, looking down at Kevin, who was shaking his head at me. The woman looked the ticket over, and her eyes got wide as she shook her head back and forth. "Excuse me, sir. I'll be right back," she said to me with a smile. She gets up with the ticket in hand and walks behind a door leading to the back of the building, where I could see police officers moving about through a glass window. After a short while, she comes out with a police officer leading the way. "Sir, my name is Captain Travis. I'll tell you what. Since you just moved to Grand Prairie, I'm going to treat this traffic ticket as a warning." I was completely stunned. I had no idea why this officer was willing to do this, but I wasn't about to argue with the man either. "Okay, officer. Thank you very much," I said as I looked around for Kevin, who had wandered near a bulletin board close to the exit. The captain nodded and proceeded to crumple up the ticket as I turned and walked away. As I approached my son to get him and head for my car, before things got any weirder, Kevin stops me. Dad, he says in a whisper. I walk over, and he points to the bulletin board. My heart felt like it would explode as I read it and scanned the pictures, eventually bringing them to rest on one in particular. It was a picture of Officer Davies, and his picture was on a memorial for fallen officers. There was no mistaking his build, and the scars on his face. Officer Larry Davies, a war veteran who was injured in 2004, served the city with honor and distinction until his tragic death in a late-night traffic accident on Highway 43 on August of 2010. He's remembered by his close family and friends. I felt dizzy, and it seemed like the room started to move around me slightly. I grabbed Kevin and Speed walked to the car, trying not to draw any attention to us. We drove back to Grand Prairie, making sure to obey the speed limit, because after that experience, I didn't want to get pulled over again, ever.